Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the honourable gentleman, the member for Warrington South, on procuring and securing this debate, but also on his speech, especially the last few sentiments he expressed, which I think were resoundingly greeted around the House with cries of hear, hear. He has spoken for all of us in his denunciation of any form of bigoted racism. And he has also, I think, spoken for the whole of our community in resoundingly saying that those who hate will not win. Now, yes, I will.
On that very point, I'm grateful to him, and he's quite right. The speech from the Honourable Member for Warrington South was particularly nice to hear. Warrington South is so inclusive. But does he agree with me that the difficulty with hate abuse, racial abuse, intolerance in general, is that it doesn't just come from the far right, disgusting and abhorrent as it is, it also comes from the far left, and it comes from right across the spectrum, and so we should be against it wherever it comes from and against whatever it's directed to.
I completely concur with my honourable friend. He's absolutely right. Yesterday's Sunday Times lead story was a shocking catalogue of anti-Semitism inside the Labour Party, which I'm sure all decent members of the Labour Party feel as abhorrent towards as I do, and as the people on this side of the House do. The reality is that we live in a time where there is increasing amounts of anti-Semitism and also Islamophobic behaviour. I was grateful that this debate coincided with the release of the Government's White Paper on online harms, the consultation which is now underway. It is absolutely essential that we counter hate wherever it raises its ugly head. We must be united against all forms of intolerance, and we must work together across parties, across our communities, to seek to build a world in which everyone has equal protection of their rights, equal access to justice, education, economic opportunities, regardless of ethnicity, nationality, sexuality, or indeed race.
Will you give way?
Yes.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and he talked about the government's white paper. Does he agree with me that that white paper is particularly urgent because social media is having the effect of normalising utterly toxic and reprehensible behaviour, and we need to lay down a marker? It's not acceptable in real life, it's not acceptable online, and it's certainly not normal. We should reject it.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. We live in the age of the false ideology of hate, and we all experience it as members of Parliament, and it is clearly and utterly unacceptable. Let me just reflect on these words of Martin Luther King. He said, "I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. All mankind is tied together in a single garment of destiny." Those are inspiring words and thoughts. And may I conclude my brief remarks with reference to the experience that we have had in Stirling constituency when it comes to embracing those who are different, and thank goodness for it. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had the pleasure of visiting the Islamic Centre in Stirling, along with my friend, the Honourable Member for Hexham, where we had the opportunity to speak to those who had gathered for Friday prayers. It was inspirational for me and for my honourable friend to be present, and it brought to remembrance an experience I had some time ago when an imam shared with me this simple idea: that as beautiful as a bouquet of flowers of a single type is, how much more beautiful is a bouquet of many varieties of flowers. That is the vision of our society which I hold on to. Because in front of me at the Islamic Centre in Stirling were people who are stalwarts of our community. They run successful businesses, and they play a very active part in all aspects of the life of the various communities that make up Stirling constituency. And I am proud of them. And undoubtedly, to echo the sentiment of the honourable gentleman, they are part of us and we are part of them. We belong together. Our home is their home and their home is our home. May I also conclude with just a brief reference to the enrichment that comes through the arrival in Stirling every year of a fresh group of international students. They come from various countries, traditions, faiths, and they bring colour and vibrancy to Stirling. Our lives are enriched because of what they bring to our community. That is the nature of our society in modern Britain, and we should rejoice in that. I certainly would invite the House, Mr Deputy Speaker, to rejoice in those differences, because they make us what we are.
Member for Given Way, there's very little in what he is saying that I can disagree with. Would the member not agree with me that racism is not just interpersonal, but it is also systemic? And it is quite difficult to sit and listen to the words that the member is saying in front of us all when we know of the record of this government, of the prevent agenda, of the Windrush generation, of the go home vans. What the member has said is fine, but racism is systemic and it is often perpetrated by the state.
Said clearly, Mr Deputy Speaker, that we should counter racism in hate wherever it raises its head. But I find it rather rich that the Honourable Lady would take this opportunity to attack those of us on this side of the House, especially in the light of the state of the Labour Party, as so graphically illustrated in yesterday's report in the Sunday Times. And I would just like to conclude by saying I will give way, in fairness.
I want to thank the honourable member for giving me way. But as a black woman stood here, it's very important not to belittle or disregard the issues that face us, because we saw a hostile environment with the Windrush generation. That was criminal, and as the granddaughter of the Windrush generation, you have to admit that that was caused by this government and no other but your government.
I incurred the displeasure of the Deputy Speaker. I apologise for taking too long. But
Member, just to say, I did say 5 minutes each. As we can see, we're now running on to 8 minutes. I'm very concerned that other speakers, in order that we could try, if people can't stick to the list, I didn't want to put a time limit on, but I'll make sure the members do go to the bottom of the issue. I don't want to have to do that. Stephen Kerr.
I'll just conclude by saying that when there's an attempt to diminish any one of us, it diminishes all of us.